What happens when an anxious, insecure, middle-aged woman with no full-time occupation who feels like she doesn't fit in with her peer group in a small town develops an obsession with a teenage boy? I mean, on some level, she had to know that her feelings were inappropriate. After all, at the time this case began, she was 42 years old. And the object of her obsession? He was 13. So we already know there's got to be some weird psychology happening in that alleged mind of hers. But since the news outlets are littered with cases of older female teachers preying on their very young students, and there was no inappropriate physical contact in this case, as far as we know, I guess we can be glad that it didn't go that far. But what this woman ended up doing may have been worse than any scenario we could imagine, because what she decided to do was to start sending threatening text messages to the boy's girlfriend, saying things like, "He really wants to be with me." But where this gets really dark and twisty is that this 13-year-old boy, his girlfriend, it was this woman's own daughter. That's right, straight from the Netflix documentary Unknown Number, we have the story of 42-year-old Kendra Licari, who pled guilty in 2023 to 2 charges of stalking a minor after she sent over 400 threatening and harassing texts to her own daughter and her daughter's boyfriend over a 3-year period. This years-long small-town mystery was finally solved when another mom in the community participated in a law enforcement sting operation, and we'll get into that. There were other charges initially filed in the case and a ton of drama that the documentary didn't cover. So that's what I want to talk about in today's video. I'm going to reveal all of the details to you. Everything from Kendra's attention-seeking behavior and hiding job and money issues to her obsession with her daughter's boyfriend. But first, I want to point out that cyberstalking and cyberbullying are very real crimes. Over 7.5 million people are subjected to cyberstalking or cyberbullying of some type every single year. And it's got a very simple definition. Stalking itself is any repeated unwanted contact that makes you feel unsafe. And so cyberstalking and cyberbullying fall under that same definition, only it's done with electronic means such as email or online direct messages, or in this case, texting. Now, every state has its own requirements about the legal definition for stalking, but usually all it takes is 2 or 3 instances of unwanted contact for it to meet the legal definition. And in this particular case, again, there were over 400 text messages that were sent from different IP addresses using burner phones and all kinds of masking apps. Now, before we get into the details of what the documentary didn't cover, if you're new here, welcome. My channel is a place where I talk about everything at the intersection of true crime, narcissism, family dynamics, and social issues that I'm passionate about. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to support the channel. It's the best free way to support the channel. I also have a website at third-verse.com where I offer one-on-one coaching. If you're interested in coaching, you can sign up for a free 20-minute consultation call so that we can see if we're a good fit to work together. I help people with everything from relationship issues to building businesses and just generally having better relationships with yourself and learning how to care for yourself, especially if you've been through something traumatic or difficult relationship of any kind. I also have an e-course called Bully Proof on how to identify and defend against manipulative tactics like we're going to see in today's case. First off, let's start out with getting to know who Kendra Licari is. She grew up near Detroit, and she met her husband, Sean, at Central Michigan University before they both moved back to his hometown. Then Lauren was born, and like all the other Beale City kids, she was enrolled in the town's only school, which housed kindergarten all the way through 12th grade in the same building. Kendra struggled with fitting in because Beale City is a tiny town, and most of the residents have lived there forever. She was not only an outsider, but she was someone whose attention-seeking behavior did not mesh well with the more quiet, unassuming small-town moms who were the parents of Lauren's friends. Kendra became overly involved in Lauren's activities to ensure that her daughter was more socially accepted than she had been. And there were lots of times when she went way too far. Now, not to get too far ahead of this, but Kendra was known as the quote-unquote cool mom. And Owen, who was Lauren's boyfriend, once called her his second mom. Kendra embedded herself in the teens' lives, and there was definitely some enmeshment going on there. Kendra coached Lauren's basketball team, so she attended all the games, and she even bonded with some of Lauren's friends, sort of treating them like they were her friends too, and not relating to them in an adult/teenager way, but sort of like in a peer group way that was really immature. There was one instance where she was doing cartwheels in the hallway with some of the other teenage girls. Kendra also grew closer to Owen's parents during this ordeal, and we'll see more evidence of Kendra's obsession later on in the story. But first, I'd like to play a part of the trailer from the Netflix documentary, which I'm told is going to be available sometime soon on YouTube, but for now, just Netflix. That's the stage for our story. We have a group of high school friends in a very, very small town who all know each other, and suspicious text messages start coming in. So Kendra Licari formerly worked in an admin role at Central Michigan University. She and her husband, Sean, purchased a family home in Beale City in May of 2019. This was a ranch-style property that Sean later called their, quote, forever home, but she was terminated from her position at the university in December of 2019. They said it was due to budget constraints, but later information suggests that she was reprimanded for spending too much time on her phone. Kind of a foreshadow of events to come. Kendra's daughter, Lauren, began dating fellow classmate Owen in the summer of 2020 when they were both about 13 years old, right before the start of their freshman year at Beale City. The initial harassing texts began over a Halloween party in October. The documentary tells the story that Lauren had not been invited to the Halloween party that the rest of her friends were going to. And the threatening text started up in mid-October saying things like, quote, "Hi, Lauren, Owen is breaking up with you." And quote, "He no longer likes you and hasn't liked you for a while." And quote, "It's obvious he wants me." The incoming texts caused a rift between the couple initially, with Lauren saying she didn't want to attend the party. At that point, according to the documentary, Lauren's mom, Kendra, reached out to the mom throwing the party and asked if it was her daughter, Chloe, who had been sending the text to Lauren. Now, keep in mind who was actually sending the text. We know it was Kendra. So Kendra was asking Chloe's mom if Chloe was sending the texts in order to start diverting attention and suspicion away from herself. Now, Chloe took a lot of heat during this entire saga. Her parents didn't believe her for a long time, and she voluntarily surrendered her phone a couple of times to be investigated. And she had a lot of emotional and social fallout from this. But after the documentary, Chloe took to TikTok and clarified that the Halloween hangout was not a party, but a haunted trail that anyone could come to. So even though her mom had organized Halloween parties for years, she insists nobody was left out or uninvited. So the documentary covers the timeline of all of these text messages coming in. They stopped for a little while after the Halloween party in October, but then they started up again in the spring, and nobody knew who was sending them. So it created a huge amount of drama in this small town, including all of the parents and the school officials and the sheriff department. Everybody was involved in trying to figure out who was sending these threatening messages. And they were not just threats, not just trying to break up Lauren and Owen, and not just trying to end their relationship, but many of them were sexually explicit, talking about things no 13-year-old kid should even know about, much less be sending out in text messages. And keep in mind, Kendra, the 42-year-old mother, is the one sending these explicit messages to Owen. In addition, she was also sending messages to her own daughter, body shaming her, telling her to harm herself, telling her to end it today, saying, "Owen wants you to end it today." And then talking about all the explicit things that she and Owen were going to do together. Now, I'm not going to show any of the texts here because it's bad enough that they're in the documentary, but I do want to point out the documentary didn't even show half of the text messages, and some of the most explicit ones were not shown in the documentary, and they were even worse than the ones I've described here. So it's pretty terrible. Over 2 years, Kendra sent more than 400 anonymous messages. She used a burner phone, she used VPNs and masking apps on the computer, basically just targeting Lauren and Owen. But that's not all. She also sent text messages to some of Lauren and Owen's friends, both as herself, Kendra, and as the unknown number sender, trying to find out what was going on in the friend group and trying to figure out whether or not people knew about the texts. She would text Lauren's friends telling them to go check on her because she was upset over the text. Authorities finally traced the messages to Kendra by the summer of 2022, leading to her guilty plea on charges of stalking minors and a 19-month prison sentence. The film really emphasizes themes of reconciliation, including the supervised communications between Kendra and Lauren post-incarceration, and some of the harmful things that Kendra was still saying to Lauren, like, how come you aren't communicating with me? And Kendra not liking the way the conversations ended sometimes, and shaming Lauren for not saying, I love you. Very manipulative and controlling on the part of Kendra. The documentary also detailed Sean's successful pursuit of full custody and the couple's divorce in 2024. And it even features one audio clip of a voicemail that was sent to Lauren's phone in the middle of the night. But it also talks about Lauren's ongoing therapeutic process and her conflicted feelings about her relationship with her mom. I have to say that probably the most harrowing part of the documentary for me was the body cam footage that was shown when the officers finally came to the house and told Kendra that they knew it was her that was sending the text messages. Lauren was present at the time, and the body language is infuriating and also terrifying. Kendra started grabbing onto Lauren, holding her very close, hugging her tightly, not wanting to let her go, stroking her hair. It was just a really disturbing display of enmeshment, in my opinion. Now, this is something that I didn't notice the first time I watched the documentary, but if you look on the table behind these two ladies, it is absolutely stocked full of alcohol bottles. That's Kendra in the tank top hugging Lauren as Lauren sobs. Now, there's just a flash of this at the beginning of the trailer, but the documentary shows the full body cam footage. Now, one of the things the documentary just touches on briefly are all of the financial concerns that were going on behind the scenes while all of this was happening. Apparently, for about 10 years prior to the cyberbullying scandal, Kendra misrepresented her work history to Sean. And according to family members, including a cousin who was interviewed during the documentary, they expressed doubt that Kendra had ever even held the university position she claimed that she had. So in 2019, again, she lost her job at Central Michigan University, and we talked about how that was officially due to budget cuts, but reportedly linked to performance issues, including excessive personal use of work resources, like getting onto social media and doing rants about academic topics instead of working. But rather than disclosing this, she told Sean that she had actually quit the position voluntarily and was transitioning to a, quote, better opportunity. She later claimed to have secured a second remote job in IT at Ferris State University, complete with what she called a huge salary bump that justified lifestyle upgrades like log cabin rental. A lot of this was probably Kendra trying to fit in with some of the other Beale City moms and be included in their social activities. But again, nobody believed she actually ever worked at Ferris. And her termination coincided with an increase in her alcohol consumption, which was later diagnosed as alcohol use disorder. Now, the home that Sean and Kendra bought in 2019, they paid approximately $180,000 for it. And again, Sean called it their forever home. They were hoping to have a stable foundation there in Beale City. And even though it stretched the family's budget and they were reliant on Sean's employment at a local mill to help pay for it, Kendra went ahead with the purchase, basically promising Sean that she'd be able to handle it. After she was fired, though, the family faced multiple evictions for non-payment, which Kendra blamed on property defects or opportunities for an upgrade. For example, they left their first rental due to an alleged foundation issue, requiring and subsequent moves were framed as an upgrade. Sean discovered the truth in 2022 when he found an eviction notice on their door. Kendra then admitted that she hadn't paid bills for months, including being behind on utility bills. In the court record was a letter from a family member that expressed terror of, quote, being homeless with our daughter from Kendra. Sean's truck was also repossessed in 2021, which Kendra attributed to a scammer, saying that they had their identities stolen. Bounced checks were explained as the result of the family's bank account being hacked, prompting Sean to inform colleagues that they had had their identities stolen. Well, they didn't really believe him, and they certainly didn't believe Kendra. So the excuses bought some time for her, but ultimately eroded trust in everyone surrounding her. Kendra also filed a false insurance claim stating that their home had been struck by lightning. Spoiler alert, it had not been struck by lightning. She pocketed the money and used it to temporarily sustain their household. She also fabricated expenses, telling Sean that there was something about a school expense or family emergencies, telling him things like her parents needed a new water heater, trying to justify the shortfall in their finances. Now, there's a lot of speculation because there was a bankruptcy filing after the court case in 2023. A lot of people speculated that there was unreported credit card and possible identity fraud on Kendra's part, but there was no formal charge ever filed for that. So Kendra's legal expenses exceeded $80,000 by 2022, and compounded with the inability for her to secure additional income or keep a job, their property was sold in October of 2022 for $140,000, resulting in an obvious $40,000 shortfall on the mortgage. That didn't even include fines, unpaid taxes, counseling costs. All of this added up to about $120,000 in debt, and they filed bankruptcy in 2024. When I look at this cycle of behavior, it really seems like an addiction and denial cycle. Kendra was addicted to creating chaos in her life and then was unable to take responsibility for it. Almost like she had to create a really stressful situation and then not own up to her part in it and blame other people for it. So that inability to take responsibility for one's own actions is one of the markers of personality disordered people. Now, as to Kendra's apparent fixation on Owen, forensic analysts revealed that over 280 of the messages that were sent out of the 400 were sent between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., many of those containing explicit and sexual content, such as references to intimate acts and a physical description of those acts. Experts characterize this as a form of obsessive delusion, shifting from initially taunting Lauren to directly communicating with Owen, including messages implying personal interest on the part of Kendra. Phone records also indicated Kendra's repeated searches of Owen's social media profiles, with some of the texts exclusively addressing things that he said in his posts. Now, this all could suggest that the primary focus may have been on him rather than on Lauren. And the worst evidence, in my opinion, of Kendra's obsession with Owen was that she continued interacting with him even after the kids decided to break up. Kendra would travel to his away games, spending hours and hours, quote, supporting the team. But the other moms didn't buy it, and they suspected Kendra early on. They noted that she had more than one cell phone, and they thought her behavior was immature and suspicious. So in this small Michigan town, Kendra's relationships with fellow parents, particularly with school and community groups, deteriorated amid these rumors of her bad behavior. Court documents later highlighted the tensions between all of the parents, including accusations of Kendra spreading misinformation about other families as well, possibly as a deflection from her own actions. These strained relationships really isolated the Lucari family, which exacerbated all of the emotional and financial pressures. Lauren was facing a nightmare situation every day. There were many days that she did not want to go to school. She withdrew from her friends. She stopped doing the activities that she really used to love. And people were suspicious of her, maybe that she was sending the messages to herself just to get attention. Combined with all the accusations that were flying around with who might be sending the messages, her relationship with Owen fell apart and she became more and more isolated. Now, before we go on to how Kendra ultimately got caught with the messages, we can't skip over the fact that even though I believe that Kendra was really obsessed with Owen, she obviously had some kind of a hatred for her own daughter as well. So many of those messages were body shaming and telling her to harm herself. Now, a lot of people have suggested this idea of what used to be called Munchausen's by proxy. It's now called factitious disorder, where a caregiver will purposely make someone ill or cause them distress and then swoop in and be the one to help take care of the person being harmed or being made ill. So there is this sort of element of, Kendra being the one sending the messages to her daughter, which would get Lauren all upset, and then Kendra could be there to comfort her. It's a pretty sick way to get attention and then to somehow have a closer relationship with her daughter. But let's go now to Jill McKinney, who is Owen's mother. She was a central figure in the collaborative efforts to unmask the harasser. She even worked alongside Kendra at first, but also with school officials and local authorities. The documentary highlights how parental alliances were formed and then frayed during the investigation. Jill and Kendra at first developed a close working relationship after Lauren and Owen's breakup in November. They spent multiple evenings together poring over the threatening messages, even the explicit ones, to try and identify linguistic clues, the manner of speech, the punctuation, the different words that were used, and all the timestamps and references to local events happening in real time. As the investigation dragged into 2021 and 2022, Jill noticed Kendra's fixation on Owen's post-breakup dating life, repeatedly probing about potential reconciliations with Lauren. Jill finally told Kendra that these topics were off limits, which strained their relationship. But by late 2021, Jill began distancing herself from Kendra. Finally, as authorities closed in, they recruited Jill to send a text to Kendra, which contained an embedded link. When Kendra clicked the link, officials were able to confirm Kendra's IP address and connect it with the IP address that was used to send messages to Lauren and Owen. So the charges against Kendra were finally filed in December of 2022. She was charged with 5 felonies in Isabella County, Michigan. 2 counts of stalking a minor, each with a 5-year felony sentence. 2 counts of using a computer to commit a crime, which enhances the stalking charges, and 1 count of obstruction of justice for misleading investigators. All of these charges stemmed from the threatening messages using technology to anonymize them and then obstructing the police investigation by feigning cooperation while continuing the harassment. There was no full trial as Kendra pled guilty in March of 2022 to the 2 counts of stalking a minor. The remaining charges of using a computer and obstruction of justice were dropped as part of the plea deal negotiated by the prosecutor. The plea acknowledged the harm to the 2 minors, but it didn't address child abuse elements, which would have included how explicit those text messages were and that they were sent from an adult to a minor. This drew a lot of criticism for the leniency that the court had, and I have to say that I agree with that. Not prosecuting the most egregious part of the crime, in my opinion, was a mistake. But who knows what goes on in the prosecutor's office, and I'm not here to second guess how law enforcement or the prosecutors do their jobs. Kendra's sentencing occurred on April 26th of 2023, and during the sentencing, Kendra did express some remorse, stating, quote, "I never want to hurt anyone else like I've already done." She also apologized to Sean for putting him through hell, and her biggest apology was reserved for Lauren, expressing the hope that they would be able to reconcile and asking for her forgiveness. The judge noted the trauma that was inflicted, but he did not order restitution for Lauren's counseling costs, despite Michigan Crime Victims' Right Act mandating it. It could be because Kendra was so deep in debt and she was about to declare bankruptcy, and that could be why they decided not to pursue restitution. But in a psych evaluation that came out during the sentencing, it was very clear that there were multiple things going on with Kendra's mental health. She had a diagnosed alcohol use disorder, which we talked about, which was basically binge drinking that escalated after she was fired from her job. Some people have speculated that blood tests from the Halloween night, where the first text messages started to come in, showed her blood alcohol concentration over 0.18. Now, I'm a little skeptical about these rumors and speculation because I don't know why Kendra's blood would have been tested on Halloween night unless she was pulled over for a DUI. But her phone did have searches for AA meetings that she never attended. She never got into hard drugs, but the alcohol definitely was a factor in fueling all of those late night texts, allegedly, in my opinion, including at least one voicemail, the one that was referenced in the documentary, where Kendra allegedly slurred into the phone, "Owen's too good for you." Kendra was sentenced to concurrent terms of 19 months to 5 years in prison for each count. She entered into the Department of Corrections system around May of 2023, and contrary to some reports claiming she only served 60 days, she was incarcerated for approximately 15 months before being paroled in August of 2024. Kendra's parole supervision ends in February of 2026 with conditions, including no alcohol use, no out-of-state travel, and no contact with specific individuals, including her daughter, Lauren, which she has already violated multiple times. But Lauren, again, as I said, was conflicted about her relationship with her mom and wanted to communicate with her at first. Kendra and Lauren were talking pretty regularly in the beginning, and then that was shut down. According to court documents, they only have one supervised communication per month. Kendra was also ordered to have mandatory mental health treatment, and she has some employment requirements as well. As of now, she remains on parole again until February. Critics of the case, again, have mentioned that failure to pursue child abuse charges, but also investigative delays, such as law enforcement not promptly subpoenaing IP records. If they had done that earlier in the investigation, it likely would not have taken as long to find out that it was Kendra sending the texts. So the psychology behind this case is really interesting. I've pointed out Kendra's obsession with Owen, and we talked about how clear it was that Kendra had a hatred for her own daughter in a way. We've talked on this channel a lot before about devouring mother syndrome, which is basically the idea that a mom can't allow their child to outshine them. And so they literally consume all of the child's resources and opportunities in order to keep the child smaller than the parent. And I think there's definitely some of that going on, where Kendra envied her own daughter and her relationship with Owen, everyone referring to Lauren and Owen as the golden couple. So I think there was some jealousy there. The documentary also unfolded a tearful admission from Kendra that she'd been SA'd as a 17-year-old. And while that definitely played into some of these dynamics, it's obviously not an excuse for anything that Kendra did. One of the reasons so many of us have difficulty parenting our teenagers, though, because of traumatic things that happened to us when we were teenagers. If our parents didn't pay close enough attention to us or give us an emotional outlet or emotional validation that we needed, a lot of times we experience that as an emotional wound. And if we don't do the healing work to repair those wounds and reparent ourselves, we can end up having a lot of problems with our own teenagers when they get to the age we were when we were wounded. Now, I'm not a licensed mental health professional. I'm just an expert in my own trauma, but I do like to talk about the healing process that I've been through and some of the tools that I use to learn how to process traumatic experiences and emotional wounds. I like to share the things that I've learned in that context to help other people who are going through similar circumstances. And I can definitely say that when my daughters started to reach their teenage years, I started to have various different communication problems with them, as well as being triggered by some of the things that they were experiencing themselves. So I can identify with the idea that until we heal our own emotional wounds, we're going to continue to experience them through the circumstances of other people. So I can't help but wonder if Kendra had gotten help for the trauma that she experienced when she was 17, or maybe she got help and it just wasn't competent or wasn't trauma informed. But I think we would have been looking at a much different situation if her own trauma had been handled in a healthy way. I really appreciated the way that the Netflix documentary was presented. It was directed by Skye Borgman, whose work I really appreciate. And it sort of took you on this journey of trying to discover why somebody would do this and who was doing it, and the rumors going back and forth in the small town. They did a really good job of suppressing the big reveal until almost the end of the documentary. They interviewed all of the participants about how they felt initially. So the interviewees talked about not knowing who this was and who they might have suspected, including some of Lauren's friends and one of Owen's cousins at one point. And obviously, documentaries can't cover everything that happens in a case. But when I started digging into some of the financial aspects going on behind the scenes, it started to make sense what Kendra was going through. I think she was deeply insecure, and she obviously had some unresolved trauma issues, but that breaking point of losing her job seemed to really escalate her problems. I think she was trying to find something to fill the time when she was unemployed, because she also pretended to work when Sean was at home. She would manufacture work calls and just pretend to be busy. And that had to be really exhausting for her, sort of keeping up this double life where she was telling Sean one story while experiencing and perpetrating something completely different in the background. I think the fact that Kendra engaged in texting friends as Kendra and also as the unknown number person shows what a huge obsession this was. It wasn't enough for her to just text Lauren or even to just text Owen. She had to start texting other people, even pretending to be Chloe at one point and trying to drive suspicion in her direction. So I think we had some obsessive qualities here, and a lot of it came from this one event that sort of created a long string of bad decisions. I really hope that by consuming true crime cases that people are learning something from other people's behaviors. That's one of the reasons I consume true crime content, is because I like to try to figure out what's going on in the person's mind, why they behaved a certain way, and how it escalated and got so far. And I hope that in looking at this case, people will have a better understanding of cyberbullying and cyberstalking, but also to recognize the signs and symptoms in other people around us. If you notice somebody becoming obsessive about someone or something, if you notice a big behavior change, if you notice that they're not being honest about simple things and that's a new thing for them, it might be time to have a conversation, either with them or with someone who can help them to talk about what's going on in their life. I've also recently talked a little bit about revenge-based motivations and how the concept of revenge is kind of the key turning point in a lot of people's minds, and how revenge seeking can lead us to go above and beyond what our normal behavior might be because of a perceived injustice in our lives. There's a really interesting article that I'm going to be going over on my channel tomorrow talking about this concept and how we can better deal with revenge, forgiveness, and justice in our own lives. I hope that you'll stay tuned. And again, thank you so much for supporting my channel. Please share this episode with someone who can benefit from the information, and I hope to see you again very soon.